Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just giving people a few minutes to connect and join in. We're excited to get started shortly. Still see quite a few people. The participant count is still climbing, so we're going to give people a few minutes to sort out their connection, and then we'll get started. Everyone, thanks for coming. Give it about 30 more seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started as people still are coming into the webinar. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with some of the housekeeping, and then we can move forward as people are still joining. So welcome to the webinar today. We have a great topic and an amazing panel, and I'll talk about that in a bit. From a housekeeping point of view, please feel free to ask questions. How you do that is a Q&A button in the Zoom interface. So if you put a question in there, the way that we're going to work is at the end of today's session, we'll have time for Q&A. We may be able to take some along the way from questions that are submitted into the Q&A button. If you submit questions via the chat button, we likely won't see them or be able to react to them in the same way. So the Q&A button is where you want to go. So also this webinar will be available on demand after the fact as well. So if we discuss something that you find very interesting and want to refer to it later or send the link to a colleague, you should be able to do that through the Reuters events team. So with that, I'm going to introduce today's topic, and then we'll introduce the panel, which is really the stars of the show today. But this session is around medical congress and really around insights management around medical congresses. Medical congresses are a really unique event during the planning year of any life sciences organization. They are singular events where scores and scores of our customers and our other stakeholders in our disease ecosystem are all at the same place at the same time. And they are places where tremendous amounts of new science is introduced, where thought processes on our disease ecosystems change or begin to change. They're also places where our competitors are, just like we are trying to have their scientific narratives or their information spread and pushed out into the disease community and evaluated scientifically. And so because you have such a concentrated sort of coalescing of everything that we do throughout the year, operating very effectively at medical congresses can really make or break your strategy, as you know, and especially if you're anywhere close to launch. Oftentimes medical congresses are such a marquee moment in the trajectory of a new product or therapy launch. So given that, it stands to reason that companies historically have really thought through how to best operate around medical congresses, how to have the best results, get the most out of them, be the most efficient. They're not inexpensive to work with as well. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is medical congresses, and really from the perspective of how do we interact with our stakeholders in these medical congresses? How do we plan for that? How do we make that most effective for them? How do we take knowledge back and share that across our businesses? All of those sorts of things. So I'm Lance Hill. I'm the CEO of Within3, and I'm going to be the moderator today. And I'm going to introduce the topic a little bit as I just did, and then we'll quickly get to the panel. So the agenda today is that high-level introduction, and then we'll introduce the panel, and we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of discussion around some of the challenges from the panel's point of view with executing efficiently and effectively in and around medical congresses and some of the ways they think about and frame the the domain here. And then we're going to go through probably a 10 or 12 minute educational session on 4 technologies that the industry is investing in that will hopefully make some of these challenges easier and better over time. And then we'll really end with a section back on the panel talking about the future, where we think as an industry we can improve, where we see it all headed, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So for my background, so again, I'm Lance Hill. I'm the CEO and founder of Within3. I'm a technologist by background. So what that means is, what my passion is finding ways where technology can change businesses and business results. And I've been doing that in the healthcare landscape for over 20 years now. And just, it's a really exciting time to be a technologist and be part of a company that's investing very heavily in life sciences generally, but even in medical affairs very specifically. And so I'll kind of lead the technology side and facilitate the panel from that point of view. So just as a backdrop, what you see here is a very, very busy slide, and that's kind of on purpose. When you think about a Congress and all the things that go into planning for a Congress, how are we going to execute? What are the things we have to think about? The content we're creating and socializing, the interactions we're planning, the readying our field force to engage within the Congress, all of those things. And then the Congress day itself while it's running, the things we're thinking about, it's day 1, it's day 2, who's covering what sections? Do we have people speaking around our science? What are our competitors doing? What's happening online? What about people who are attending the Congresses virtually in today's world? And then post-Congress, what happens afterwards? So it's not like the Congress ends on a Thursday and we say, hey, that was great, back to our day jobs, and there's really no outcomes other than kind of patting ourselves in the back. And this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the things that are taken into account or the challenges in thinking about a Congress, but it is a set of them. And so it is a very, very complex event. And the other thing to keep in mind is, while at the Congress, every single day is a little bit of a new adventure. And so things that happened the previous day, science that was released, trends that are topics that are trending, etc. And so it's almost like even while the Congress is going on, every day can be a slight change in thinking and goals and strategy and so forth. So what I wanted to do first was just start off and open up a poll and ask the audience, again, by no means is this a comprehensive list, but we put a set of some common problems that folks might have around Congresses, and we'd love to get your sense on which of these you think are the most challenging with your strategy or execution. We'll give people a couple of minutes to answer that, and then I'm going to introduce the stars of the show, the panel, and they can react to this poll, as well as talk a bit from their point of view around this domain. I see all the poll results coming in. We have a very high attendance volume today on the webinar, which is great. So give people a few minutes or a few seconds here to kind of keep the poll going. So it looks like with these 4 challenges, generally speaking, there's not one that is clearly a massive outlier versus the others, but it looks like the idea of understanding and synthesizing the output of Congresses and distributing takeaways is right now at least the highest scoring challenge. So with that information, I'm going to go ahead now and ask the panel to introduce themselves and your background, and then we'll just get right into it and start talking through. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Hopefully the panel has had a chance to look at some of the results.
Lance, oh, here we go. Okay.
Yep. Let me go ahead and stop doing that. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and start with the panel. Maybe starting with Siobhan Mitchell. Do you want to introduce yourself? That would be wonderful.
That's great. So thank you so much, Lance. And also it's wonderful to meet my panelists, Andy and Robert. Lovely to see you this afternoon, and also to Reuters for the invitation. So firstly, my name is Siobhan Mitchell, and I'm working in Sanofi, and I work as the General Medicines Global Medical Office Head within the General Business Unit for Medicines. So my background is primarily a degree in pharmacology and a PhD in molecular medicine. And I've spent over 16 years in the pharmaceutical industry and many years before that in academia, in research and in teaching, and also in tech companies as well also. So for me, I am passionate about working in that pharmaceutical industry and providing new solutions from the healthcare dynamic. Because as you were just mentioning, it can sometimes seem like a chaotic environment, but when we all come together, we can really deliver some marvelous things. But hopefully through the rest of the panel discussion, we'll be able to hear great insights from each other later on. Thanks.
Thank you. Andy Townsend, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, yeah, my name's Andy Townsend. I'm part of the medical affairs function within Pfizer, specifically within the Pfizer Hospital Business Unit, which deals with their anti-infectives treatments. My background, I'm a chemist by training, and I've been in the pharma industry for the past 25 years in a mixture of R&D and medical affairs roles. And I think particularly in those roles, the opportunities you get from congresses to get insights which really do inform development strategies, marketing strategies, how you position your medicines for the best use for patients is really, really important. And they are overwhelming, I've found, in terms of the number of insights that you can gather at these meetings. So the ability to synthesize and disseminate those information across your organization quickly and efficiently to then pivot to make the most impact is really important. So I was very honored to be invited on this panel to talk about this topic. It's really important and core to what we do, and very, very glad of the opportunity to work alongside Siobhan and Robert on this.
Thank you. And Robert Kersing, let's introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, Lance, and thanks for having me here. Obviously, this is a topic of high interest. I'm a pharmacist by training, actually started out as an intensivist in medical surgical trauma and then transitioned to industry, where I've been for almost 20 years in various capacities, and now leading the worldwide scientific alliances team at Novartis. And remit really for myself and my team is partnerships and external engagement. And that is transcending from evidence generation with cooperative groups to how do we engage with medical societies and show up at congresses cross-functionally. I think you had highlighted that, and I think this is a critical part of probably this conversation to have, as well as how do we engage with medical experts and do this cohesively as a singular organization being aligned. So a lot of topics here, highly relevant, and I'd have to say also continue to evolve as we go into this peri-pandemic or post-pandemic period now, where things are certainly shifting from a 100% virtual going to more of a hybrid environment, and that will probably not go away in defining what our new normal is.
So thanks, Robert. So let me start with you and maybe expand on what you just talked about. So as you think about some of the challenges in being effective within a Congress, we've gone through a pandemic that has instilled travel restrictions. We're kind of in a hybrid mode now, where most Congresses, if they're going to offer live, they will continue to offer virtual options as well, and that makes life potentially even more complicated. How do you think about the overall space and the challenges, Robert, as you think about a Congress and how you would want your team to be effective?
Yeah, thank you, Lance. So I think we look at this as an opportunity. Virtual, of course, in 2020, when we learned of the pandemic and really the sudden switch to an all virtual environment, I don't think there was a clear understanding what that's going to look like. And we had to rapidly convert. When you look at some of the larger congresses, we work very closely with several of the societies to really co-create the space. And I think where we're now is that we're really trying to come to a seamless integration of the on-site experience, the on-site sharing, the on-site engagements with virtual participants. And so we have to be prepared to really integrate completely across the organization that touches multiple levels beyond even the Congress. Virtual allows us to really bring all the right stakeholders to the table and really have richer discussions ultimately. So at the Congress, when you go get down to the basics, the beauty of the Congress is you have everybody there. So when you go to a large meeting like ASCO, it's a mad dash. You have meetings from starting morning until night. Now there's a much more of an acceptance of that virtual component. So you can bring additional people in that are relevant to the discussion and really enrich these conversations. Having, for example, MSLs there, from the country, if you're in a global organization that otherwise might have not traveled to the Congress, you can now conference them in seamlessly. You can bring in your development colleagues. So I think this gives us a lot of leeway to really engage in a much more productive way.
So thank you. So Andrew, you had mentioned in your kind of opening the challenges around gathering all the insights, the volume of those insights, and sort of managing them. How do you think about that challenge today? What do you do at Pfizer to try to deal with that sort of volume and that problem?
So we tackle it as best as we can, and I think what we do at the moment, particularly for the large congresses, is we have a large team on the ground. We will organise ahead of time and say these are the key topic areas we want to explore on. We'll obviously look at the posters and the symposia that have been planned for the meeting, and we'll assign people to go and pick those. People to have their ear on the ground. We have various mobile applications to log insights as we're in the Congress, and they sort of are populated to a sort of central store. We'll tend to have debrief meetings for the teams that are there present physically at the end of each day to try and debrief and share what they've got there. But what we don't really have at the moment is an ability to distill those insights, sort through Neurolingo programming, those sorts of things, to try and get a sense of what the themes are in real time. That takes weeks and sometimes even months to sort out post-Congress to get to. So it's that ability to convert the key themes very quickly, I think, is a gap at the moment. And we rely very much on our MSLs and our people who are present at the Congresses to really try and bring the key themes to the fore. There's always the risk that you're missing something that then comes out in the larger insights as you analyze them over time.
Yeah.
Siobhan, what about from Sanofi's perspective?
Sure, absolutely. Lance, I completely agree with what Robert and Andy have just said. And actually, I'm sure that for everyone on the call today, they appreciate that we're actually sharing all the same challenges, and that maybe none of us have got the perfect solution, but that through a discussion like today, we'll be able to come out better. But I would say that there are a number of challenges when we think about where we are right now in the space. So if we go into that virtual environment, it's how do we engage new KOLs that we've never interacted with before? Because previously in that traditional setting, you have built a really great reputation. You could have even organized to meet them or have a spontaneous meeting. But now it's about how do we either gather those actionable true insights in the virtual setting, or the other question of how do we really understand the why behind the data, behind the opinions as they're being expressed and as they're being discussed. So when we're watching the live virtual events, we sometimes might feel that we miss that granularity of why are they asking that question? What's the feeling from the audience in the room? And then the other component I think about as well, just to lead on from Andy and Robert, is that sometimes in the past, we might have viewed congresses as being quite a segmented approach. So the pre-Congress planning, the dates of the Congress itself when it was live, and then afterwards. But now it all runs into each other. Now it's practically seamless, and the Congress is never really over, because you have a huge, significant post-Congress communication strategy, and you can use all of this content, all of the posters and the abstracts and the symposiums and the slide decks for a long, long time afterwards to cascade. So there's a couple of challenges that we all definitely face, and then maybe even more so that traditionally, as we mentioned, that scientific dialogue used to always happen on the Congress floor, and now it's moving. It's moving into the cloud. It's kind of like moving into the social media platforms. So these are a couple of challenges I'm sure all of us on the phone today are facing.
And I think, Siobhan, I think you're bringing up an important point, which is, what do we do with these insights? Because we're collecting them for a reason. We're looking for actionable insights, and this needs to be part of the broader dialogue beyond the Congress. How do they inform our strategy? How do we validate these findings? you could act on one singular tweet that's negative, let's say around a study or a tweet, but is this really more broader feedback that you're hearing? So I think you need to take these learnings back and then understand, how does this inform your future engagements, and as well as what are your next steps in terms of mitigating any feedback or taking that in as informing your strategy. And I think the important piece is that Congresses are a point in time. There's a lot of activity, but when you look at individual relationships, it should be built in already in how we're engaging with our partners, our colleagues, and that see patients on a daily basis, those that run trials, in a continuum of engagements. We should plan for this well ahead of time. Congresses are not a surprise, so we can leverage that as part of an ongoing plan, building relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, to add to that as well, and just sparks a reflection that really a lot of the things we collect at Congresses aren't insights until we apply some synthesis to them. So, they are data, they are facts, they are observations. So I think what Siobhan said about trying to understand the context and trying to rationalize that in the context of broader insights. So to Robert's point about, you might see observations and feedback from multiple sources. It may be quite varied. So how do you seek the truth from the noise, really? That's a skill. So that synthesis to create true insights that you can act upon takes some work. And I'm not sure at the moment we have the tools that allows us to do it on the fly in these meetings. We need some time to digest and take that on board. So again, if there are ideas, best practice solutions that allow us perhaps to get these insights in the moment while we've got everybody in one place and the opportunity to follow up on those, that would be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I echo exactly just as you said, because there's sometimes a chance that maybe you can get overwhelmed with the data that you can potentially collect, and then you forget to apply that lens and really see, is it a true insight? Can it really change our strategy? Is this something that we want to bring back to the brand teams and sit down and discuss it in a real cross-functional meeting with our commercial colleagues or our access colleagues? And does it lead us to really wanting to address like a data generation gap, or is there something particularly important here from a guidelines update? So I agree with you, there's more work for us to do from that synthesis perspective once we come back from the actual Congress itself as well.
And I think one thing we haven't really particularly highlighted, so going into, it's the preparation period, right? One thing we had done is really be very clear, what are the key insights we're trying to gain to really make sure, especially the MSLs, are well prepared, because you need input from your development team, you need input cross-functionally. What are we seeing? What are our questions? So that everybody can actually have some sort of consistent approach and ask similar questions, because that's how you get sort of that volume of feedback and insights that almost brings some validity to this, because now you have it focused in key areas, key topics.
Agreed. And I think that, as you're mentioning, it's about understanding who your key KOLs are. So it's not possible to interact with your 100,000 attendees. You've got to be really, really critically sure who you need to really interact with from a KOL perspective. What's their customer journey? What's their learning track? Where are the gaps and how can I address those? So I think it's a good point, definitely, Robert. Yeah.
All right, so let's transition to the middle section. So I think that was a great discussion. Thank you. And I think what we're taking away from this is, when you're heading to a Congress, it is a web of people and ideas and challenges and timelines. And so what I wanted to do is share 4 technologies that the technology industry is investing in that specifically can help with some of the things that were brought up earlier. So here are the 4 technologies that I want to spend a little bit of time on today. Now, network analytics, social listening, asynchronous virtual engagement, as opposed to like a Zoom meeting like we're doing right now in real time. And then AI and natural language processing, and how those technologies are entering here into this domain to help things. So let's start off with network analytics. So network analytics is a technology concept. Social media companies use social network analytics, social network mapping as their core business to help better understand how people connect with each other. And that sort of technology is really impacting a little bit of what Siobhan was just talking about, which is, how do you know which KOLs or which HCPs that may not even be KOLs, but might be really impactful to what you're trying to do? How do you identify them better so that when you're in the context of a Congress, you are better able to make sure that you're getting to the people who can matter. And so traditionally in this space, the way that kind of KOL profiling is done is very volume based. So it might be something where we take a scan off of PubMed and we say which KOLs are publishing the most things. And that might give us a ranking. We say, here are the top 11 KOLs who were the loudest, if you will, scientifically. And then there might be a set of additional folks who show up that maybe weren't ranked very high. And those would be in a second tier or a third tier. And your focus would typically be on getting those, those ones at the top that kind of come out in traditional rankings. What network analytics do is companies apply the ability to look at not just who's the loudest, but how do they interact with each other? How does information flow across the network? Not just a map of who co-authored what and how does that link together, but a variety of different factors. How, who's working on specific sets of things together? How does referral patterns and analysis flow across the network? How does the digital online aspect flow across this network? And when you build it out this way, what you get is a little bit of a different view. And you can see that while some of the people that you might have ranked highly from a louder volume of publications sort of idea are still there, you can also find out that they're clustered together. And so if you're interacting with them, you're maybe only influencing a part of the disease ecosystem that you care about. And there might be other people who occupy very interesting points in the network, maybe because they have large followings online, maybe because they are a bridge from one geographic region to another. And so what you can move is from a kind of a ranking on volume using these sorts of technologies is something that we call the invisible college. The idea there is when you're in college, when you're in medical school, knowledge is flowing from the professor to the students to a great degree, and you kind of know how knowledge is being transferred to the broader audience. Once you're out in the real world, that's happening through a lot of peer-to-peer relationships and views. And so understanding kind of the invisible college can be really important in helping refine and hone that. So this technology, a lot of companies are investing in how to take these concepts and apply them better into helping drive out understandings of the HCP landscape in different facets and different contexts. So the next technology that is really impacting the space, especially in congresses, is social listening. So I think it was mentioned earlier on the panel, the amount of the scientific dialogue that happens online is increasing and growing. It went from social media was kind of, early adopters, and it was a kind of a neat thing, but real science was still centered in kind of offline, science dissemination was centered in offline vehicles, to now more and more, like while the Congress is happening in real time, you can almost be getting a sense of how scientific narratives are flowing out through an audience. And so this is becoming a bigger focus for organizations, and therefore more difficult to understand how to deal with. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we have the online version of what's happening within a Congress, but we're also trying to understand who's doing what online. How do we think about that? How does that measure into our strategy and plan? Does that change who our MSLs, as an example, should be interacting with and cultivating relationships with? And so the industry, the technology industry, is putting resource here as well. So there are a variety of different kind of social listening platforms or social monitoring platforms with different sets of capabilities and different focus within the life sciences group. But broadly speaking, what these technologies do is first allow you to cultivate in real time, not just here's Twitter and Facebook or what have you, but cultivate in real time a broad array of blogs and other sorts of sites where this online dialogue is happening, again, before the Congress, during and after, allow you to help cultivate that broad swath of information and define it in a way that these are the topics, the terms, the things I care about, so that instead of the thousands and thousands and thousands of things coming out of ASCO in any given time, as an example, to Robert's example, I can say of those, these are the ones that really matter to my strategy I want to be listening for. A lot of the technologies will also help you understand automatically is sentiment positive, negative, how is that changing? So you're not trying to figure that out on your own and kind of reverse engineer tweets and manually understand that. That can be a huge time saver. And especially if you're trending things, we had the Congress and we released our information, and now we're trying to see, over the weeks following the Congress, are people talking about what we had to say positively? Is that trending up or down? That can be really important. And obviously those things come into dashboards and that are hopefully easy to use. And then from a compliance point of view too, depending on where you sit in the world and what your compliance stance is, whether you're able to look at this to certain individuals, more broadly to disease communities that aren't attached to individuals and things like that. Tools that at least work in the life sciences world tend to understand there's some different compliance footprints depending on where you live in the world and what your organization is comfortable with from a GDPR point of view, as an example. And there, you can configure it that way. So social listening technology is something that is definitely helping. Asynchronous virtual engagement is the next broad technology set. So if you think about engagement, there's really two flavors. There's real time, where everyone's at the same time in the same place, like we are right now for those who are live. And then there's overtime or anytime virtual engagement, asynchronous, where people can watch a video on demand. They can participate in discussions, over time. And that asynchronous engagement type is oftentimes newer for organizations than kind of, maybe having to migrate quickly from real time to Zoom style meetings like we have right now. So this set of technology really cut its teeth from a business point of view in the education space, with online universities building out programs for adult learners in the off hours, and having it be more than just kind of a chat board and a place to download videos, but having some structure and some agenda and some flow to it. And then since then, these technologies have really started to pervade the life sciences space to allow different ways of engaging folks online, as opposed to, are you free Friday at noon, Eastern Standard Time to engage with me when I can engage with you, versus offering our customers the ability to engage with us on their time. And so a lot of organizations have been implementing these sorts of technologies in different ways, and there is a lot of R&D on the technology industry side in improving these sorts of engagements. And then the last technology I'm going to talk about is really artificial intelligence and natural language processing, and how that's impacting the Congress space specifically. So just as a primer, artificial intelligence is a really fun buzzword it gets bandied about a lot. So just from a background point of view, artificial intelligence is kind of an all-encompassing term. You might hear, and really the idea is that it's building machines that can do what humans would have to think about, is the basic idea of it. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. It's a flavor of it. And that's really around getting a machine to automatically learn from data that it's seeing over and over again, to do things without you having to explicitly say, if you see this, then do that. And then deep learning is a subset of machine learning, which is really the idea of trying to get a machine to think like a human, to evaluate a set of data coming out of a Congress and say, what matters here? If I was Andy evaluating this, but I'm a machine, am I going to come out with at least similar conclusions or not? So that's really what deep learning is. And natural language processing is kind of the most common flavor of that for our purposes, which is the ability to look at real statements. So many of the insights that come out of a Congress are free text. I talked to this person, they said this, they said that, this text was posted in a tweet online. And so the ability to read real sentences and how real people say it, or a transcript, and come out with what that means is really, really important. And to do that in a life sciences medical context, not a general context, not a healthcare context, but for a life sciences context. And so this is an example of how an NLP type of engine might analyze. So at the bottom, you see an insight: product A has been well tolerated in younger infants, et cetera, et cetera. Really what these technologies do is they start to break apart these free text sentences and assign some intelligence to them. So one is that their life sciences smart, so they understand products and terms that are very medically specific. So you can start to automatically organize around those things and sort. as opposed to just keyword analysis. 2 is they have sentiment analysis to know is well tolerated. But then the next sentence says scares. Is that positive? Is that negative? Is that both? Is that positive and negative in 2 completely different contexts? So the ability to understand that in a complex way and make the sort of evaluations that a human would make on this in real time. And then the 3rd is kind of concept analysis, the ability to say younger infants, older infants, that's all pediatrics. That's all the concept of families. There's concepts that aren't listed here that you can pull out and say, okay, these things are grouped together, and we're seeing routinely that we're getting different sentiment in a certain set of concepts than we are, generally. So that's what these technologies do is they try to then organize and display the results of these to address exactly what Andy was talking about, which is how do I make sense of all of this? So those are the technologies that companies are investing in very heavily, and over time they will begin to change the dynamic of what's possible in the specific domain around Congress, insights gathering and management and targeting. So that's kind of that section, and hopefully that was interesting. What I wanted now to turn it back to the panel. So that's a look from what companies like Within3 are investing in to make this process easier. But whether it's technology centric or not, as you think about the future of Congress and operational excellence around Congresses, maybe starting with you, Siobhan, what do you think that looks like?
Wow. So first of all, Lance, you've given us quite an amazing array there of slides in detail. And sometimes I'd say that sometimes it might be easy to get lost or to think, my goodness, how do I get my head around this? Especially if you're on the call today and you're thinking, oh my goodness, are every company doing this? Am I far behind? What I would say is that we're actually reaching quite an exciting juncture. We're reaching quite an amazing time point in our lives, in our careers of Congresses, and things are changing. And we can take some small steps to really take that leapfrog forward. So I'll just maybe pick one topic from what you've mentioned there about the social listening. And I know that the way that you presented it, you say that yes, it could be all encompassing, which is quite amazing. Another way to look at this would be that, yes, you could use your social listening for your Congresses, but in our perspective internally, we look at it across the full engagement strategy. So what are we doing with the KOL before the Congress? How are they interacting with their peers? Who is their network? Who's their node of influence, so to speak? And it gives us this ability to have a really great perception in real time of what the dialogue is externally. And it may not even be started by a data release from Sanofi. It can be something else completely. But I do believe that the social listening aspect is important, because when you consider it as a face-to-face, and all of us do this job in the country, we're all MSLs or medical advisors doing an amazing job on a day-to-day basis. But imagine the reach that you can now have at this social engagement level. Imagine from a digital opinion leader perspective, that influence and the relevance that you can bring. So I think that there's definitely merit in maybe investigating for our colleagues today on the call in that social influence space, having taken a look into that sphere to see what else it could bring to them.
Yeah, thank you. Agreed. Andy, any thoughts on where you see the future?
I mean, certainly the piece that you outlined in terms of network mapping, I think resonates, and is something we're looking at quite actively within Pfizer. I think looking at those most influential people, not always being the loudest voice, but sometimes the most connected, is really important too. Now, you then got to look at that through a lens of a digital opinion leader and a key opinion leader, and often, the digital opinion leaders, because it's not peer reviewed, it doesn't necessarily always carry the same weight, but it could have a much greater reach. Whereas the key opinion leaders tend to be, members of guidelines committees, or they're authors on a number of peer-reviewed journals, etc. So that they carry that sort of academic weight behind them as well. So I think there's a balance to be had there. So we consider that when we're considering who are the influencers and the opinion leaders that we want to track as we go into Congresses. I think the other piece that you raised, which we are seeing more and more, and it talks a bit to whether you think about virtual or hybrid events, is this piece about asynchronous virtual engagement. Certainly the feedback that we've had as we work through the pandemic, and we've tried to get a sense of, are we having an impact, are we being successful, is that HCPs really like this. They do miss the face-to-face congresses. I think we will see a return to that. They see that as an opportunity to meet up with their colleagues and exchange ideas in a very free way. But time is a real factor for these people. And they much prefer the asynchronous offerings in terms of being able to digest content at their leisure and being able to synthesize ideas there, not necessarily being beholden to scheduling a meeting with a rep or an MSL at a set time. So I think we've got to get smarter in terms of not only what we offer in terms of the digital content, but how we then follow up with them to see what their reactions to that were. So I think we've got to get a bit smarter in how we collect those insights in a digital way. And we're learning. I think we're investing lots of time and effort into that.
So Robert, I know Novartis has been innovating in this space and will continue to. How do you look at the future?
To me, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I mean, we could probably set up a number of additional webinars and talk about each one of these topics in depth, and they're all fascinating. I think the future, though, and Andy touched on this a little bit, the sheer volume of information that we're all dealing with is personalizing information. How do we get the right information to the right person at the right time? I think that's a core issue we have to solve. With virtual has come this dramatic swing to all digital, all virtual, this flow of information that everybody's getting bombarded with, which can be good, but it can also be overwhelming, and your particular information may get lost. So how do we build systems, ways of engaging at a very personalized level? I think that's a key piece, almost a magic bullet we have to figure out to solve. And I agree, just a comment on the asynchronous engagement. I mean, we've done this, and especially if you work across multiple geographies and multiple spare time zones, that's a very nice way of bringing people together. If you have the right moderation, getting input, and the beauty of this is you can have peer-to-peer dialogue, even across, Asia Pac, Australia, Europe, US, and so it's a very powerful tool that we probably don't leverage enough just yet.
So I'm going to bring in a question from the audience. I'm going to ask it specifically, but maybe raise it up a level and kind of just open it to whoever wants to answer. So one of the things that has happened with this complexity has also been thinking about your audience in more defined segments. So Andy, you mentioned a digital opinion leader versus a KOL, and maybe some of the different thoughts that you might have for those. The question specifically was, do you think about the live attendees of a Congress going forward very differently versus how you might think about those attending the same Congress virtually? That's the specific question. But then more broadly, how do you all think about the different types of audiences going forward as the complexity and the options that you have for engaging and identifying different audiences increase?
Lance, so maybe I'll take that and jump in here. I think it's a great question, because even if you look at the simple definition of who's a digital opinion leader, what does it actually mean? Or a digital medical expert? I think we're kind of still struggling with, what's the right terminology here? You could look at somebody's Twitter behavior and really segment them in. Are they just an observer? Are they retweeting a lot of their colleagues and amplifying, or do they post original content? So I think understanding that and being aware of that and building this into how you engage, and then decide, why is this important? Can this influence, for example, you're looking at, out of 10 medical experts that you could choose to work with on a publication, do you maybe want to pick the 2 that are really active on social media because they're going to amplify the work that you're doing with them? Mm-hmm. I think those are the things that need to be part of the dialogue and the planning and the considerations.
Yeah, and also the second part of that question about will you treat those attendees differently, whether they're in live or whether they're in virtual? I think the answer to that question is yes. Also, we have to be really cognizant not to exclude the individual that is live, is physically there, because we're building a lot of our engagement strategies now on networks, on our chat room functions, being able to ask the dialogue, and we just need to be really conscious not to exclude that person who's there physically, for sure.
So here's a question, so a little bit of a different angle than we've talked about so far, but I think it's a fascinating question. The question is, what about cross-communication between MSLs from different countries within the Congress? So what is the communication inside our companies from a field force perspective, maybe at the Congress those who are not, but are trying to follow along virtually, and potentially, as we were talking a little bit earlier, have maybe the ability to get involved in the discussion otherwise would have. How do you think about the field force intra-communication as it pertains to the Congress life cycle?
I mean, from a Pfizer point of view, we really encourage that. So often these colleagues are very much focused on their national roles, and they don't get the opportunity to interact very often. So we actually find bringing together colleagues across boundaries and giving them the opportunity to exchange ideas can be a source of insights in its own right, just stimulated from internal colleagues with different exposures to HCPs, being able to talk through ideas and really expose that. So we really encourage that at a face-to-face meeting. I think virtually we don't do as much as we could to encourage that. And again, part of that's a factor of time. So I think if the tools were there to allow that to happen somewhat organically, so similar to what Robert's described in terms of these chat boards, etc., and really allowing people to have these conversations asynchronously over a number of weeks, I think that's something we will do more of as time evolves.
And I think some of the platforms that can facilitate that dialogue, are important. Is your organization using an internal Yammer, for example, that you can share experience, best practice across boundaries? A lot of times I think we're more segmented in regional geographies, such as Europe, because it's a very different healthcare system than the US versus what's going on in Asia Pacific, where you have very disparate healthcare systems and resourcing. So I think it depends on how you approach it, but I think if you boil it down to what are key questions in a disease area, for example, there's tremendous amount of value in encouraging that dialogue and learnings.
So what about, another question from the audience, as you speak more specifically around online, work, posting and being involved with social listening, and even releasing science during a Congress online ourselves. From a compliance point of view, what are some of the things to keep in mind there, and how does the compliance framework maybe impact how we think about working online in and around a Congress?
I might start the ball overing there. I think that, Lance, it's quite important that before you embark on any activity like this, you do have your in-house team, that you sit down with your compliance colleagues, your regulatory colleagues, your legal colleagues, whoever it may be, to draw out your roadmap. The wrong thing to do would be just to start off and initiate an activity without having all your internal stakeholders aligned. You definitely need your roadmap where you're going to look and see what's permissible under your own local SOPs, international SOPs,
Exactly.
from data privacy perspective. So there is some groundwork to be done to establish the framework that you can work on, definitely, sure.
And Siobhan, I think you're hitting on some key challenges there, and every company will likely treat this differently. There's inherently some legal and compliance challenges here, let's say, that could be around off-label promotion that you need to be very sensitive to. And I think your associates absolutely need to be trained there. Of course, most companies will by now have social media guidelines in place, but having a clear understanding on how to leverage that is imperative. And I know on our end, we're still working through some of that and understanding what are the true boundaries, because nobody wants to put the organization at risk. But at the same time, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift. Can you tweet about a particular presentation at a Congress, for example? Or is this going too far? Where are those limits? And I think this is an area that's evolving. But if you look at the opportunity, just take ASCO as an example. The numbers are staggering. The impressions of just the ASCO 2021 hashtag was 1.79 billion. So it's fascinating to see how powerful just Twitter alone as a medium is. So this will not go away. In the oncology space where I work, Twitter is a key platform, and I recall a tweet from a particular international investigator at Mayo Clinic that said, "My goal is to attend this meeting just on Twitter."
The reach there is fantastic, isn't it, when you consider it? When you consider that more people are now involved, they're more exposed to the information, the data. And I actually see another question there that lends on to the earlier question about the person who isn't actually allowed to engage in any type of social media from a Congress perspective, and how you can drive attendance. So if you can't be on the social media platforms, consider the virtual platforms before and after. There's some really good providers of virtual engagement rooms that you can be in. You can bring your KOLs in, you can talk about some of your data, you can ask them the challenging questions. Will this impact clinical practice for me? Are there anything else from your country's perspective we need to be aware of? So there's other things that you can do if you're not allowed to do this. But I would also maybe go back and rediscuss, as Robert mentioned there, the landscape is really changing and the world is changing very, very fast before our eyes. And we want to be there together to really shape the healthcare landscape and not be behind it.
Just a real quick, Lance, because I think we have to also, again, come back to why are we doing this, right? Yeah. Our North Star should be, at the end of the day, how are we impacting in a positive way patient care and patient outcomes? So working backwards from that, what information do we really share that really gets us to that final goal? I think that helps. And if we're doing this with the right spirit and with the right intent, I think that helps us move the goalpost.
Yeah, it is, because it's that knowledge exchange, but it's also a robust dialogue. It's the critical reviews of the data. It's people challenging the data that's important from an unbiased perspective as well. And when we talk about congresses, it isn't just presenting our most recent data on our product or therapy area. Our Congress highlights should also be the case of representing each of our colleagues fairly on this call today about the therapeutic area updates also. So for sure, it has to be about the enhancement of the patient outcomes.
So there's a number of questions. I'm just going to kind of group them together that are in essence along the lines of, are the technologies as presented futuristic, or are they real and being used now, and are there concrete examples of companies using them to their benefit? The answer is yes, they're real. Yes, they exist right now. And so this wasn't kind of a one day we'll have natural language processing. It exists now, and different companies are using them to different degrees. This is not a within three commercial, but our company obviously embeds all of these technologies in all of our offerings, and a lot of companies use our tool set to help with congresses throughout. But other vendors too, not just within three, are investing very heavily to make these technologies not just kind of generally interesting, but quite specific and focused to help business leaders in life sciences solve problems. So don't look at that section as this is 5 years from now. These are really things you can learn now and determine what may or may not work for you and your strategy.
Lance, I think on the natural language processing, I mean, for anybody that's wants to, I think, have a little bit more real world example, take Amazon, take product reviews. They use natural language processing. They take thousands of reviews and they group it by specific topics. So you can find information, you click on that keyword, and it takes you to the specific commentary. I think that's a very appropriate example how we almost should integrate this into our organizations, collect all that insights and really kind of group it and be able to access this more efficiently.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And really what's happening on the tech side is using some of those same frameworks that Amazon would do is then teaching these technologies to know not is product A better than product B at a consumer level, but what is the concept of efficacy? Yep. And where do I see a set of data coming out of interactions with KOLs, and how do I think about them relative to efficacy versus safety versus adherence versus a number of other topics that are very specific to life sciences, but are really where a lot of that IQ goes, being able to sort those better so a real human can actually look at those and make the ultimate decision. These sorts of technologies are not ever going to replace, in my opinion, a real human's judgment. But what they do is they remove 80% of the work of gathering and sorting all the information that you need to make judgments about. So instead of taking weeks to make those judgments, you can take days. And they bring it all into real time too. So you're not waiting for some big coalescing of information out of a CRM system or something to try to then start weeding through. You can see them in real time. Mm-hmm. We have a few minutes left. There's a lot of questions that I want to keep making sure we're answering some of them. What other lessons have each of your organizations learned over the last couple of years of being forced virtual only with some of the congresses?
Yeah, so I think from the virtual only perspective, that's what happened the minute that the pandemic hit. So all of us would have been in that exact situation. And I think that the flip over was quite a poignant time, to say the least. But we have learned some lessons. We've learned some very hard lessons about what to have as regards in the booth. What sort of materials do physicians really want to see? They don't want to see the heavily branded traditional pieces of information that may have been up there previously. All about the type and the format. Consider the infographics, consider the short scale videos. So there's lots of things that we've learned that can help us across the board. Also to open this up to Andy and Robert, because I'm sure equally everyone has done really good things in this space.
I think this, oh, go ahead.
You go, Robert.
No, I think what really strikes me as the fully virtual environment, which will continue, what I found particularly interesting is the democratization of data. What that means is if you look at specifically lower and middle income countries now have access to the congresses where they previously didn't. They are travel restricted, there are financial restrictions. And in some of the congresses that don't have such a financial barrier to entry, meaning registration, we're seeing them now come be really participants in the dialogue. We did not have that before. So I think that's an extremely positive development.
I agree. I think the thing we've had to pivot to with virtual, I think, is that ability to be offer the interactivity, and so not being able to convert a face-to-face meeting into something equivalent to a virtual meeting. We've found meeting series are much more effective, shorter, more bite-sized meetings, opportunities for interaction such as polls and things like we've used in this, opportunity for breakout workshops, trying to create those. It all requires thought and planning, but you can have effective interactive virtual sessions globally, like across time zones, with that forethought.
I know that we are really maybe have time for one more question, so I'm going to go ahead and pick one, and then we'll probably bring this to a close. But I think as Robert was saying, we could probably have a webinar series on different aspects of Congress execution and thought. So I know this is a lot. But the last one I'm going to say is, what about the skills within the team for being effective at medical congresses? How has the last couple of years and all the things we're talking about changed what skills your teams need to execute properly versus maybe a few years ago, if any?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question actually, because I think that medical are undergoing a major upskilling across the board, and not just for congresses actually. So to be really straight, we need this for everything, from a data generation, a data dissemination perspective, a KOL engagement. We're now playing within a completely different framework. We're on a different playing pitch completely. So I think that every company must support their medical staff, their medical colleagues, the teams, to make sure that we upskill. We've got a lot of work to do in this area, and we are doing well, but there's still more room. So it will be hard to just say how to upskill just for congresses. I think it's everything at the moment.
I think the other piece to just quickly add, as I know we're quickly running out of time, is awareness and agility. Be aware what your customer wants, right? Do they want to meet in person? Do they want to meet virtual? And then leverage that accordingly to what their needs are and flex to that. I think that's super important. And we're losing a little bit. I hear that a lot, the personal element, but by not being able to meet in person, sit across from each other. At the same time, we see each other, we can still read body language. I personally don't think we're losing that much, but there's still that element. We don't have that chit chat, that informal as much, but I find that virtual engagements have become much more informal. And in my experience over the past years, in some ways, actually more productive.
Andy, what do you think? Do you think any different skills required for medical teams as we embark forward?
I think it's just that agility and nimbleness that Robert described, really. I think we are looking for people in the medical community, obviously, who are subject matter experts, but they need to be able to have that learning resilience to be able to learn new skills. I think Siobhan's right as well. There is a change in emphasis, and medical function is becoming even more prominent than it has in recent years. Certainly within Pfizer, we are looking to do a lot more scientific exchange and pivoting away from traditional sales field force to medical. So there is a need not only for volume, I suppose, in terms of medical, but also those individuals who are adaptable and can communicate across different channels, because that's going to be vital going forwards.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. This has been an amazing panel. We covered so many things, and you all have such deep domain experience. It was really easy for me to participate here and simply ask questions and listen to what you all had to say. This webinar will be available on demand for those who want to review it later or refer to a colleague. Thank you so much. If we didn't answer your questions, you can submit those to either within3.com or to the Reuters folks. and follow up that way. So please feel, if you're watching this on demand later, not in the live session, and you have questions watching on demand, similarly, you can submit those either to Within3 directly or to Reuters as well for follow-up. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your attention. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Lance.
everybody. Thank you.